Welcome to another segment of Provocative Conversations, destined to provoke further thought and spark greater questions regarding God, church, and the religious establishments of both the past and the present. I am the proud heretic, Mr. Provocateur himself. Your perception of God means everything. Your perception of God means everything. As I mentioned in an earlier recording of this particular topic, I stated that either you're walking in love or you're not. Either you're walking in faith or you're not. It's not that you may not or you don't possess it, the love or the faith. It's just that you're not walking in it. It's almost like you're on a sidewalk or you're on the street and you're walking that white line. If you stop walking on that white line but you're still on the street, you're still on the street. You may not be walking that white line, but you're still on the street nonetheless, or you're still on that sidewalk nonetheless. A lot of people are definitely on the street. They're definitely on the sidewalk, but they're just not walking on or within the line. I remember when I worked with the prison system, both as an officer, corrections officer, and as a chaplain, full-time volunteer chaplain. I was putting in 70 hours a week at a major institution, about 1,300 inmates at times, depending on if you counted those in lockup and whatever else that was additional to the actual number, or if they haven't had an overstock of inmates. I hate to say it like that with human beings, like they're cattle or something, or possessions on a shelf or whatever, but that was the case. But these guys, they always had to walk in a line, a straight line, and there was an entire sidewalk that goes all the way around the yard of the prison, the permitted area of the yard of the prison for the most part. And these guys had to walk within, there was a line that separated the inmates from the officers or from the civilian employees or whatever. But the employees, the officers, those who weren't inmates, they were allowed to walk in, say, 3/4 of the sidewalk, or for the most part, a little over half of the sidewalk. But on both sides, the inmates could walk, but there was a line separating the inmates from the workers. Just a line, not a wall, just a line. And the inmates were required to walk within the confines of that line. In some cases, they had to walk on the line. But the line was where they were in compliance. Now, they could easily walk beyond the line or whatever and end up in the wrong. But for the most part, they had to walk in the line or on the line. And if they didn't walk within the line or on the line, they were in violation, but they were still on the sidewalk. Well, that's how it is with God. You're still on the sidewalk. You're still in God, even though you may not be walking within your faith, within your love. It's still there. So just because a person may not walk a certain way or the way that you feel that they should walk as a so-called Christian or a so-called child of God, as though all of us aren't children of God. Well, It doesn't mean that they're not that. It just means that oftentimes, for whatever reason, people are not walking in that state that you may read some verses in the Bible stating how we should walk in a situation. Like when the Bible talks about forgiveness, and these are things that I'll deal with at some other time, but when the Bible talks about forgiveness, you can't expect someone to just be forgiven just like that. Sometimes forgiveness takes time. Forgiveness is a process. Getting to the point of forgiveness is just like getting to a certain point of faith that you can accept a murderer, someone coming and murdering your entire family, torturing your children and cutting their heads off. And you're told by the Bible, love all men, do good to all men. That's not going to be easy. That's going to take a process of time. You have a period of mourning that you got to go through. You have a lot of psychological breakthroughs that you got to get through to in order to accept you, and God forbid, if you witness the situation, you have a lot playing in your psyche that came in through your five senses. You heard the screams. You heard the jabs of that knife going into their system. You heard the bones being cracked and hit and reached by that knife as it was going in deeper. You heard the gurglings of their lungs and all as they were trying to breathe and trying to talk, and blood was gushing out and they were bleeding from the mouth. You saw that blood. You saw that torture. You saw the agony and the pain that they were in. You saw it. You saw their eyes. You saw everything about them. You saw the killer's face and how he or she was laughing and getting enjoyment out of it, watching you suffer and watching them try to scream for you or say something to you, but the blood in their lungs, because of the internal bleeding and all, was just gushing out of their mouth. You saw all of that. You felt the life of them leave them. You felt the warmth of that blood on your body as it splattered on top of you. You touched them. You touched their cold body, their stiff body. And now somehow you're just supposed to read a verse, forgive just as God forgave you. Forgive one another. If a brother or sister is caught up in a fault, you say, well, that's not a brother or sister. Well, that's what you say. That's not a brother or a sister. I know that's some hellacious stuff that went on, but it is what it is. And that doesn't change God's perspective. It doesn't change God's person, God's character, God's nature. Well, God is never like that. Well, first of all, if God is never like that, you got a lot of pages in your Bible to tear out. And if that's the case, then you agree with me that there must be some fallacies, there must be some faults and some misconceptions and misprintings, misstatements, mistakes in that Bible, in that book. Because you go to the Old Testament and God was saying, kill them all, man, woman, boy, and girl. Kill the animals, kill them, slaughter them, burn them, torture. I mean, just beat them down, not torture them, but basically torture them. That was torture, the way that they were killing people and innocent people. Kill them all. You can't let them mingle with you. If they mingle with you, they'll have you serving their gods. Kill them all. Go to the lesbian, the homosexual, and just stone them to death. Yeah. Go to the one that's caught in adultery, stone her. And if that's what it meant and that's what it was saying, well, in Jesus' time, Jesus came during the time period of the law. The law wasn't done away until Jesus, after Jesus' death and resurrection, and we were supposedly put up under a new covenant. Well, during the time of Jesus's earthly ministry, that woman who was caught in adultery, According to the Bible, they were supposed to stone her and the man. And Jesus didn't hold to the Bible. He didn't hold to your Bible because he never stoned her. He said, if you don't have nothing going on in your life, then you stone her. And nobody could stone her, not even Jesus. You better start ripping pages. Or maybe you better change your concept. You better check your perception. Your perspective is off. You need some new specs. So, the dimension and longevity of your walk in God is determined by the dimension and longevity of your faith in God. Remember, Peter was able to walk on the water as long as he was in that dimension of his faith, that he was able to walk on the water. But soon as his dimension, his longevity in that degree of faith that enabled him to walk on the water began to dwindle, or he began to step out of, or he was no longer able to move any further in, the dimensional longevity of his walk with Jesus began to sink, began to fall back, because Jesus was still floating, but Peter was sinking. He was going down for the count. The dimension and longevity of your faith in God is determined by the dimension and longevity of your perception of God. How much of a perception of God do you have? How deep does your perception of God go? Because if it doesn't go deep, then you won't have longevity in that perception. You won't be able to deal with certain situations for a long period of time. You won't be able to live around certain things. You won't be able to have a long experience, a long trial of certain sorts, because your perception won't let you. And if your perception doesn't let you, your faith won't be able to do it. It won't be able to support you. That's what happened to Peter. His faith no longer supported him, or his ability to see God properly. His perception was sidetracked, and his longevity of faith deteriorated to the point that he ended up sinking or beginning to sink. And the dimension and longevity of your perception of God is determined by the dimension of revelatory knowledge you have of God. How much revelatory knowledge do you possess of God? Because that determines the dimension and longevity of your perception of God. Your perception will never go beyond your revelation knowledge of him. I can't perceive him where I don't have any revelational knowledge of him. You know, I think it's in Corinthians, they were fighting over, well, one man says this is clean, one man says this is unclean, one man thinks that he can eat anything, this one thinks he can eat only meats or only vegetables, and he said, let every man be convinced in his own mind. And then it also says, how can you judge another man's servant? How can you say that this person's freedom of knowing that he can do all these things is more right than this man's ignorance, that he can't eat everything like this one can? And then the one who can't eat, who feels that he can't eat everything like this one over here believes he can, the one who can't feels he can't eat it, or he's not supposed to eat it, he feels that the other man in his freedom is wrong. And he said, you're not to force that like that. Well, what it shows in there is that how you perceive God determines how you behave in life. And how you perceive God is predetermined by how much revelational knowledge you have of your freedom in God and God's love for you, God's freedom towards you, God's finished works as it relates to you. So if you think that something is unclean and defile, and anyone who partakes of it is defiled, then you will be that one who feels that I can only eat vegetables because these meats are unclean. See how, because you have a limited degree of knowledge concerning your freedom to eat anything and all things, you have a limited revelation knowledge of God and all that God has done for you already. Your perception of him becomes distorted, and now you begin to erect all of these laws and rules and regulations, oral traditions that you pass down and you received from some hand-me-down setting. Now you're pushing that as though it's God. Now you're calling yourself representing God, and you're doing God a favor by putting all of these hard task rules. There's a verse in the Bible that Jesus talked about, and he said, you put these hard tasks on other men's necks. You put these yokes around their necks, and you yourself can't even live out these yokes. We put so many yokes on other people's necks. Religious people put so many yokes on other people's necks, so much weight on other people's necks, and tell them, if you don't do it this way, and if you don't carry that this far, and if you don't keep your neck straight in the midst of all of this here, you are not a child of God. You will not be going to heaven. And that's not the way you're supposed to do it. And that's not the way Jesus did it, period. So the dimension and longevity of your perception of God is determined by the dimension of revelatory knowledge that you possess of God. Now, when I say revelation, revelation is just simply, definition wise, it's just information that is newly disclosed. It's not new information per se. It's just information that could be thousands of years old, that could have been true since before dirt, but is newly disclosed to you. So it's revelational to you. It's revelational information that you didn't possess prior to hearing it, reading it, whatever. And it's surprising, and it's very valuable. That's the basic definition of it. I didn't make any of that up. It's the revealing of something previously hidden or secret. A showing or revealing of what is believed to be the divine will or truth. That's what revelation is. When you reveal something, what you're doing is you're disclosing something that's unknown. You're making it visible, making something visible that had once been hidden or covered. Not necessarily that God was hiding or covering it, though he could very well be, but because you just didn't see it, you couldn't see it, you hadn't progressed to that point and stage that you would be able to see it. It's to expose the part of something that would normally be covered. That's revealing. Giving away a new, surprising, valuable information. That's all it is. So when I say revelation, I'm just saying some information that's not new within itself, but it's being revealed to you for the first time. So for you, to you, it's new. Not necessarily new in its content, though, but to you, it's new. The dimension and longevity of your faith determines the dimension and longevity of your experience. Now, that just pretty much goes to what I said earlier, because Remember, how long you can walk in that faith determines how long you can walk in that experience. So say you're loving somebody, but then where your faith drops off, or where your revelation knowledge of God drops off, that's where your love ceases. And remember, faith which worketh by love. I think that's Romans 5:5. The two work together. And the dimension and longevity of your experience determines the dimension and longevity of your walk in God's love. Because oftentimes, if you can't walk in an experience, what if you got to work side by side with people who are on your hit list, people who are on your hell list that you have written off as going to hell? Now you have to sit there and you have to work with them. And then you see them doing their lunch break or whatever at work, reading the Bible, having the audacity to read the Bible, having the audacity to pray out, having the audacity to call on the name of God or Jesus. Wait a minute. They aren't supposed to be doing that. They're on your hit list. And you're like, you know what? God ain't hearing none of that. They're just wasting their time. When God is sitting there with all of that, God is using that to work at you. And then you get so disgusted with it that you get up and walk away. See how long you were able to live up under that experience that God was giving you? God was affording you through those people that you've already written onto your hell list. And now you can't walk in love. Instead, you walk away rebuking them. I rebuke you, Satan, in the name of Jesus. I will not accept that. That is an abomination to God, and God is not in that. I curse that. I send that to the pits of hell. How you going to send that to the pits of hell? First, you contradict yourself, because first you say Satan and his angels are in hell. And then 500,000 other times in the last couple of years, you've already sent them to hell. So now either they went then, either they were never there in the first place, or somehow they snuck out without God knowing it, and then you put them in over 500,000 times over the years, and they still didn't listen to you, which means that your prayers aren't effective and you have no power in the things that you say. And now they're just as loose as they've always been on this earth, running up and down. And the effectual prayers of the righteous availeth much is no longer worth anything, because your prayer has yet to lock any of them up. Or is it that you just hadn't read the scriptures to know that supposedly there's coming a time where they'll be put there? Your perception of God means everything. How much you perceive, how much you possess. Your perspective on God and these angels and this so-called devil and this so-called hell means absolutely everything. So, the more revelatory knowledge you receive concerning love, remember God is love, the more accurate your perception concerning God becomes. Let me say that again. The more revelatory knowledge you receive concerning love, the more accurate your perception concerning God becomes. The problem is we don't have enough revelatory knowledge of God's love or of who God is. So because we don't possess that, we can't be any more accurate in our perception of God than we are in our knowledge or revelation knowledge or revelatory knowledge, the revealed knowledge that we possess of love. You want to know God? Know love. You want to know love? Come to know God. And I'm saying love in its dimensional sense, because there are dimensions, there are levels in love. And if you want to go into the greater things of God, the deeper things of God, then come to know him, his love, the person of God, the character, the nature of God. Get your perspective of God correct, and that other stuff will come. And the more accurate your perception of God becomes, the greater your experiences with God become. You know, if you want to have a proper perception, if you want to have a proper, greater experience with God, get a more accurate perception of him. Perceive him in a greater light than you have. And it's not that you're not already experiencing him and his love, because you are. You just don't realize it. So intelligently or intellectually, consciously, you don't understand that so much in all that you're going through, you're receiving from God, and God is making himself available and known in all that is occurring in your life, and that has occurred in your life throughout the process of every day of your life. But if your perception of him is not accurate, even though you're receiving from him in his experiences, you're really not receiving from him. You're experiencing what he's doing, but you're not contributing it to him. So you're really not experiencing it per se, not to the point that you're gleaning from it. And you're growing and you're going deeper. So the more accurate your perception of God becomes, the greater your experience with God becomes. Because if you can get your perception right with God, when you begin to experience the small things in life, you know this is God. And then you begin to experience him more and more and more. Why? Not because he's doing more and more, but because your perception has changed. Your perspective has changed. The angle at which you look at God has changed. The level to which you look at him and look at people and look at things in your life and things in the world and things involving other people. When you look at those things, you see God more, because now your perspective is right. And the greater your experiences with God become, the more active your love and faith in God will be. Because as you begin to experience him to greater depths and heights, you end up loving him and believing in him and trusting in him more and more and more as time goes on. It just builds upon itself. So if you want to walk in a greater dimension of love and faith, get a greater dimensional experience with God. But if you want a greater dimensional experience with God, then get a greater dimensional perception of him. Because perception of him is going to be connected with your experience with him, how much you experience with him. And then your experience with him is going to be connected with your love and your faith toward him, or your knowledge, your revelation knowledge of his love and faith towards you. So if you want a greater dimensional perception of God, then get a greater dimensional revelation of him. But if you want a greater dimensional revelation of God, then you're going to have to get alone with him more often. You're going to have to cut some television off. You're going to have to cut some people out of your life. You're going to have to stop ripping and roaming the streets. You're going to have to leave some clubs alone. You're going to have to put away some things. You're going to have to put away some childish behaviors. Why? If you've gone to college, you know, if you have midterm exams and these exams are cumulative and it affects your overall, I promise you, you know that you cannot go out and hang out. You cannot be with people if you want to do good on that test, especially if you've already failed certain quizzes already, and you already know that your term paper that you got to turn in is going to be bombed because you're not a good writer, because you can't keep yourself still long enough to even get a thought locked in where you can actually build upon that thought to the point that you can put out a 20, 30, 40, 50 page term paper with little or no errors that will count against you. So you got to make it up with this test. So everything is riding on this test. Well, do you have time to go out and play? Do you have time to sit and muddle on the phone? Do you have time to go to the theater? Do you have time to sit and watch TV for hours without end? If you don't, for that, then you know for God you don't. There's a verse in the Bible that says, seek God with all your heart, all your might, all your soul, all your mind. And then others that say, you will find me after you seek for me with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your might, all your strength. If you're not doing that, there's another verse that says, he is a rewarder of those who diligently, continuously, intently, consistently seek him. Consistently seek him. So, if you want to get along with God more often, then you're going to have to get into your, at one time I would say Bible and pray. I'm not saying that now. Now, for me, that's what God used. Bible and prayer in my beginning years. God met me where I was. God carved out a path for me that I had to follow. I'm not telling you that's the path that God is going to carve out for you. God may have something different for you, a different route for you. But for me, he carved out a path of me getting into the Bible, getting into prayer. You know, it's not, how would I say? It's almost like God not only let me, but he afforded me to go through these progressive stages of coming to know him. A lot of people are in progressive stages of one type or another or many of knowing him. They're coming to know him. Some people go through more stages and phases than others. Some people have to go through Islam. Some people have to go through Hinduism, Buddhism. Some people have to go through Hare Krishna and the Sikh religion. Some people have to go through an alt-right movement before they come to understand the importance of humanity, and that with God there is neither Jew nor Gentile, bond nor free, male nor female, but we're all one in God, and that God made out of one nation all people. Some people have to go through these things in order to come to that understanding. Some of us don't. Some will. Some of us won't. But we're not to project our God's path to our truth upon them. Well, yeah, but the Bible tells me if they don't know God, they're going to go to hell. Don't you know that God has enough within himself to protect them from going to hell? God knows how to keep them out of hell. God knows how to preserve his own. He doesn't need you. He doesn't need you begging for money, whether on television, whether in the local church or whatever else, so that you could have money to run around the world to say that you went over here and you went over there to save souls. Why in the hell is you going all over there when you got people all around you that's so-called going to that hell? When everybody used the word hell, you get so touched over. Like when I just used it. How can you get touched over a word that you keep saying people are going to? If you're touched by that word, don't you know that God is touched by that word too? Now, I will put out there God is not that petty, but I'm just saying. And if God is not that petty and we're supposed to be imitators of Christ, why are you doing it if that's not what God does? Question yourself and question your reasons, question your motives. So, like I was saying, if you want to get along with God more often, then I would generally say get alone and into your Bible and pray more often. God, that's not what God is going to use with everybody. That's what he used with me. You let God lead and guide you to what to do. I'm glad God brought me the route that he brought me, because I promise you, it was during those years, those long years, those elongated years, that God rooted and grounded me in truths that go beyond just some scriptural readings and all. Because let me tell you something. And I may talk about it some other time, but I stored up writings and I digitized everything that God had given me for years and years, from like 90 all the way to 2000, what, to present, but 2000, perhaps 2000, well, to present. But everything, for the most part, that I had digitized, meaning that I had taken out of paper form and put into my computer, I lost. One day I was sitting and I was working with the computer and I was doing some moving around of stuff, and I lost everything. It disappeared. I was so wounded and I was so hurt, even though I was moving away from that stuff, because God was maturing me and showing me some things that I knew would change my writings and all, and change my notes and everything. Now, let me tell you something. I don't know anyone personally who had anything close to what I had going on as far as how much I had digitized at that time. I had years and years and years and years and years, 10, 12, 14 hours a day of study, all put down, and just unbelievable what I lost. Sometimes I still get a little touched by what happened. And I remember saying, like, God, why? And I still miss some of that stuff to this day. But what I believe God was doing was that God was erasing my past to show me afresh. It's time for you to look at things differently. It's time for you to grasp me without all of that baggage that went along with that as you were progressing into where you are, as you were going through your metamorphosis. It hurted me that I lost that stuff. And again, I still am touched by it at times now. Now, don't get me wrong. It didn't leave from within me. But I can't just necessarily go back and recall a lot of it. But when I need to, or when I'm talking, a lot of it will begin to come up. But it's in its purest sense. Now, sometimes I'll say something like I said, there was a time I would tell you, if you want to get alone and know with God, if you want to get to know God more often and get along with just you and God. And then I said, but then if you want to do that, what you got to do with your time is you got to put time into Bible and prayer. That's what I would have said before my metamorphosis, or the completion of my metamorphosis, or the furtherance of my metamorphosis, because I think I'm still going through some of it now, the process of metamorphing or morphing or becoming something more, something different as I speak. So I'm not saying that process is complete in the least bit. I believe it goes on until. But what I am saying is, there was a time that I would say Bible and prayer. I don't say that now. I say to you, get along with you and God. Get quiet. Whatever you want to say to him, say to him. See what happens. See where he leads you. See where he guides you. And if you can't see it, just believe that he still is leading you and that he still is guiding you and he is bringing you into a greater perception of him. And don't always look for somebody else to be having your same experience so that you can talk to them. Yes, when you're going through this metamorphosis or metamorphical experience, even if I just made a word up, this metamorphical experience, you want to talk to somebody because it gets lonely. You're in between who you were and who you're becoming. And people won't understand you. They don't accept you. They want to reinvent you. They want to revert you. They want you to revert back to who they knew. And they'll tell you you're changing. You got to be careful. These are the last days and you don't want to miss God now. You don't want to come this far by faith and then leaning on the Lord and leaning on the scripture and leaning on the church and leaning on what has been preached all these years, and now you turn on it. Forget all of that. Go and do and be whatever you can, because you can only do what you're supposed to do, and you can only be who you're supposed to be. God will keep you from the rest. Trust me. It may even seem like you're wrong, but there's a verse in the Bible that says it like this: and if our hearts convict us, or if our hearts condemn us, our conscience condemn us, because your conscience can condemn you when God isn't. He said, don't worry about it, because God is greater than our conscience. God is greater than our heart. Oftentimes, we'll believe that not all things are lawful. We'll believe that we can't eat certain meats. But God is saying, eat. Don't call unclean, Peter, what I've already shown you is clean. So you get with God and let God walk you through the rest as you walk it out. And if you want to get into your Bible and if you want to pray, then do what you do. But first of all, you got to start everything with separating yourself from people and the things that tend to dance in front of your face through what we call the world, through the things of this world, the entertainments of this world. Nothing wrong in those things per se, but for some people it is wrong. You know, for some people they can't do those things. For some people they have to live a stricter life for whatever reason. But that is how God does it. But don't put your conviction on other people. Don't drown other people with your conviction. That's just a conviction that God has given you. Don't usurp it over other people's convictions. Let God do it, then what he does. Let God do what you. The most important thing is God doing you. You doing God. Just do God. Let God do you. And all these other jackknife knuckleheads, well, their day will come too. Let's keep talking. Let's keep talking.